recorded. Okay, welcome everyone to another session of the Body Worn Camera Ad Hoc. It is August 23rd, 2022, approximately 6:04 p.m. We have our reconstituted ad hoc. Unfortunately, Commissioners Harbin Forte and Vice Chair Peterson are unlikely to make it tonight. We're still going to go through the rest of the document, a continuation of before, as well as some edits that were made since then. Lieutenant Turner, Officer Cervantes, want to take us away?
Yes, it'll be Officer Cervantes. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll go over the notes that you actually sent to us. So give me 1 second. All right, can you guys see everything? Are you guys able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Commissioner Shea, you sent over some notes. I've highlighted some of them. And the first one we went over, we talked about how you were referring to the guard and referred to the assignment as hospital watch. Lieutenant Turner sent you guys over some policies that we do refer to our hospital guard as guard throughout the policy. So we're going to go ahead and keep that consistent with everything. We're going to leave that the same. If you go on to the next highlighted one here, Commissioner Shea noted that there should be an accountability. We did agree with you. So I added that they receive an order from a higher ranking member. A higher ranking member shall note the reasoning for deactivation via CAD, their body worn camera or report. Your next note that you had on there was in relation to recording at the hospital. After speaking with Lieutenant Turner, we're going to have to refer that to our city attorney, Bridget Martin, for proper procedures when conducting a preliminary investigation at the hospital. So she'll speak with their representative as well. That way we can give clear guidance to all of our staff. The next section, when body worn camera activation is not required. I understood that you were concerned that it was like a suggestion that we didn't have our cameras activated. So we also wrote in there that under the following circumstances, but it is also permitted. So pretty much saying that, yes, we still can't have our cameras on, it's a discretion thing, but we did take out the during any meetings with a confidential informant as defined in DGO 04 for the informants, and we actually put it on the shell right here, the specific prohibitions, because we do not want our officers meeting with their CIs on camera for safety concerns. And then the next one that you had mentioned was the recording of the body worn camera statements. We do agree that we do want the officers recording the statements. It didn't necessarily need to be in the policy, but we will reiterate it during training. So we have to leave that option open for the written statement as well. Any other feedback or questions from anybody regarding Commissioner Shea's notes?
So I just have, one follow on to that is regarding the part about not hospital guard, but just in terms of patient confidentiality. So you can see it there at the part we scratched out. So Commissioner Shea, Officer Cervantes and I both agreed that you were correct, that it was vague around, reasonably believe that patient confidentiality, that was a problem. However, we do have sort of ongoing concerns from our partners, especially Alameda County Hospital. So we've been getting a lot of pushback from them around patient confidentiality and our officers and our body worn cameras. So our city attorney is working with their general counsel on making sure that we sort of follow their privacy rules while also following ours. So I want to have her help us synergize that for proper direction. So we're not blowing that off, but we need to make sure that we kind of get both sides in there, because there's some legitimate privacy concerns from our partners in the medical field, and then there's definitely legitimate concerns from the accountability side. And I want to make sure that both are kind of, or at least we work with our city attorney to give us the best compromise language, and then we'll put it forward to this ad hoc. But it'll take us a little bit to get with her.
Okay, great. Where did we leave off? Did we finish off with when it's required or when it's not required? Or when it was for deactivation?
So I believe the last part was deactivation. Was that your memory?
Yes, we stopped at deactivation.
Hmm.
And then Commissioner Shea sent over his notes.
So perhaps we could go through the deactivation section, see if anyone has any comments or thoughts about what is in here, what should be added, or changes or anything else.
I have a minor issue. I see CAD there, and I'm assuming that's computer aided dispatching, correct? See in number 5 here, higher ranking members should note the reasoning for deactivation via CAD. And I don't think the common person would know what that means. I see it down here explained below, and I was wondering if that definition can be raised up higher.
Yeah, we'll always try and make sure the first instance of the acronym is
I
spelled
see the
out.
definition below the first instance.
Right. We'll make that change.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I like a little bit of uncomfortable silence to make everyone think about it a little bit.
Yeah. So we're happy to sort of maybe go on and kind of put a pin. And I know this is so. This does not mean, and of course, I think maybe just for anyone watching or the ad hoc members, just because we go by a section doesn't mean we can't come back, things like that. But, I know Officer Cervantes is ready to talk about the other parts of the policy, right? So if you would like, we can kind of move on to section C, talk about it a little bit, and that might jumpstart people's thoughts. We can always jump back.
Let's get through the rest of B since we didn't finish that up last time. So I think that would mean that we are at the when activation is not required section.
Yes.
So and then Officer Cervantes, if you could just kind of for each of these sections, kind of give us a little bit of an overview of kind of what this means and how, at least especially our field officers who are the main users of these cameras, how that's going to impact or their work regarding both a sort of accountability and then day-to-day operations.
Okay, so starting with when the body-worn camera activation is not required, but we still can do it. So when we go to a cold report saying pretty much we know that the subject or suspect is not on scene, we're going to contact a victim of, let's say, a 459 of a car, and the suspect is long gone, like 5 hours later. We will use our discretion to activate our camera, whether it be the victim's statement or anything else. That's number one, members taking the report when available information indicates the suspect is not on scene. And then, so when most officers, for number 2, it says members on a guard assignment at a police and medical psychiatric jail or detention facilities, members shall assess the circumstances. So as an officer going on a hospital guard, we have to assess the subject and their mannerisms, whether they can be combative or not. So if we're going to take them to the restroom would be the example. We would assess if we need to have our camera on or off. And if a lot of it's going to go to the suspect's demeanors or actions. So that's when we would be required to activate it. And that's why it's kind of leaving us in that, giving us discretion to activate or deactivate.
So when I look at this section, I think of it kind of like the way it is. These are some situations that don't need to turn on your body worn camera, but here are some things you should think about or why you might want to do it. Less so with the first one and more so with the second. So I wonder what other situations we might want to highlight in this section. I know that during the demonstration, one of the officers mentioned that, you know, they have their body worn camera activated almost every time they come into contact with anybody, just for their own protection. It's certainly not required, right? It's not, this policy doesn't require it a sort of contact with a member of the public, but here are the things you might want to think about. Is that something that we might think about putting in here?
Any contact with the public? For the discussion?
Public during an investigation. I mean, I don't know what guidance you want to give to officers. Like, these are some situations you don't have to, but you might want to think about. Right.
So I think when we think about from the department's perspective, there's a few things we're kind of thinking about categorically. You know, adversarial type contacts, right? Contacts where there's you know, things aren't going well or are trending down that road. And then also you know, using this as an evidence collection tool, right? Those are kind of two main ways that we use these. And also, it's, you know, its use is really good as a performance measuring tool, but that's one that really is captured in all the shalls, right? The required activations capture pretty much all the performance things where we're looking to measure how the officers perform. So it's really kind of in that, yeah, contact with the public phase and then the investigation phase. So then, you know, I think from our perspective, we look at it and say, well, you know, where are areas where if things get that we'd like the officer to maybe think about turning their camera on or not. And so Officer Cervantes and I kind of talked a little bit about something similar to this in terms of, you know, how much we put into a policy versus how much we talk about in training. So this is another consideration that we frequently think about when we do these policies, because the policy is the thing that the sort of yes and no, you shall do this, you shall not do this type of thing. And that comes into play a lot when we're talking about holding people accountable, discipline, things like that. On the other hand, the training, which is still something that can come into play there when we talk about our PowerPoint presentations or lesson plans or things like that. But the training is where we start getting giving examples, talking about other things. So in that context, those are sort of the two categories that I would suggest if we wanted to talk about examples of things that that officers should consider or for their discretionary use, or when they might want to turn the camera on. It's those things, you know, contacts with anyone where things are getting contentious, and then where having that video might aid the investigation. So I think that would probably be something we think about.
What are some of the things that you put into the training for, you know, like or that you do train about that are you don't have to, but here are good times to think about it?
Right.
Outside of, like, what are the examples of when it's going to be contentious or evidentiary purposes?
Right. I mean, so yeah, for other things, I can think about, you know, just capturing sort of things for future note, like if we are maybe going to have an operation, or actually just one recently where there's a problem that the neighbors have noted about these people on these dirt bikes who keep going to a certain park. And so going to that park, when there's no one there, turning on the camera to kind of get a feel for what do things look like from here. So that way we can watch that video later and see, okay, when Turner's standing right there, this is kind of the perspective of the bikers, where to, what can we see, something like that. So that's, a useful tool to provide us some information about where we might be going somewhere in the future, something like that. So like a tactical or situation planning. I don't know, Officer Cervantes, can you think of any other things that we might, that we've had sergeants or anyone sort of teach us to good best practices or uses of these body-worn cameras outside of our required activations?
Yeah, so we get a lot of priority calls that could just be of a disturbance, and a lot of times we'll go and the disturbance is no longer there. So what some best practices is, we'll activate our camera, we'll show that there's no disturbance, we'll actually talk to a couple of people and they'll say that they haven't seen or heard anything. That's sort of the best practice, because even the people that are on the streets, they have no idea what we're there for, but someone did call in. Sometimes it's reporting of people being code 7, being armed with a firearm or weapon. That would be a good example of when we do use our camera and speak to people, but don't necessarily need to be activated.
Okay. Thank you for that. Shall we go to the next section? Oh, Mr. Lyles.
Yeah, maybe we can, I don't know how to wordsmith it, but maybe we can say something about, an officer's intuition and encourage them to follow that if they feel like it's necessary to turn on their camera. We encourage them to do so. I know in the court system that's an acceptable understanding that police officers have with their experience, that they should follow their instincts. If you think you're dealing with a group of folk who may be trying to create a situation to set you up, or you think there's something that's suspicious about what they're doing, but you can't quite put your finger on it, we should say in the policy somehow to encourage them to follow their instincts.
I will definitely make that note. I've already made that comment, and I do appreciate that. Is it former Chief Lyles?
Did you used to be a chief, Reggie?
I'm sorry?
Officer Cervantes was asking if you were formerly a chief.
Yeah, I did interim work, so up here in Novato, and so that I wasn't ever selected as a permanent chief, but I did do that.
Yes, sir. So I did make a note of that, and I will work on trying to draft something to implement that into this policy, because that does happen.
So this is Jason Wechter.
Yes, sir.
Do we have something in there requiring that officers activate the cameras when they're on a skirmish line at a demonstration?
I don't believe that is specifically noted, but that is the direction when we are on the skirmish line, is to have our cameras activated.
And that actually is going to be that's part of our crowd control policy. So we do have, and yeah, it's required by court order now that their cameras are on. So that's it's another policy we're working on, a separate ad hoc. Join us on Mondays or Wednesdays to see that. So preview of coming attractions in our militarized equipment. But yes, that will be part of it because it's required by court injunction.
Does that mean it should go in here?
So that's a good question. Because it's crowd control, and I think that our attorney's advice is that everything regarding that be put in the crowd control policy. It's going to be explicitly in there. I try and avoid that. But I think maybe, Officer Shabansky, we could have a note to reference back to the crowd control policy for specific direction regarding crowd control. So that way people have it in their mind and can note that there might be some more stringent requirements during crowd control or crowd management situations.
I'm just wondering if potentially it should be both places, because officers are likely to be more familiar with the body-worn camera policy because it's something they deal with every day, whereas crowd control situations don't crop up that often. And particularly for younger officers who haven't been in a crowd control situation. And if one crops up spontaneously, I mean, would it make sense to have it in both places to ensure that all officers are very aware of that requirement?
I think what we try and do is definitely reference and say that there are more stringent requirements in the crowd control policy, but keep it from laying out the specifics, because things like what happened recently do happen, is that like we will have a lawsuit or some sort of change in practice. And I've seen this a lot where something gets changed in one policy, but then it doesn't quite get changed in the other. Then there's conflicts. Then it's really hard to hold people accountable or hold them to the standard.
Okay. Section 11, B11.
All right, recording statements with the body-worn camera. Members are authorized to use this body-worn camera to record statements. The only thing that we shall not be using the recorded statements during a child abuse or sexual assault victim case. And then we also shall adhere to the statement guide set in our report writing manual in section S1. Is there any questions about our recording statement in section B11?
How about if a prisoner is going to the lavatory or something? Should we protect that privacy? Have that stated in here?
Do you want to go back up to?
If we have it already in here, then ignore what I'm saying. But you tell me, is it already in the policy?
Yes.
Okay, ignore it. Forgive me.
No, you're fine, sir.
Are you talking about specific prohibitions number 6? A2 sub 6, because it says specifically about at department facilities, not generally. Or is it deactivation?
Can I make a request just to enhance the screen just a little bit? Because as we keep scrolling, then it's harder to follow because it's a little bit smaller. So that's my only request. It doesn't have to be too large, but it makes it easier when it's scrolling. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Bottom right, the plus minus or the view function bar.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Is that better? All good, okay,
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
anytime.
So a question on the table was whether taking someone, a suspect, to the bathroom is covered.
We don't have it specifically covered in, Mr. Lyles, are you stating like to have it deactivated during this during the escort? Because we spoke about having it on while transporting subjects to the bathroom. Remember that conversation?
Yes, and
I think officers do respect people's privacy when we do take them to the bathroom or camera is on. we can adjust our body, but I don't think we can specifically state that in the policy, or how. We can't do both, can't have it completely off, or.
Your thoughts, what are your thoughts on noting, putting a note there, and because we've been successful in a lot of these policies about making notes for when we do training, and training, because I think we did discuss that we want to have, so in the field, if this were to happen, the officer's camera would have to be activated, because that's still a detention or arrest. And then in the station, we've put in that requirement that when they're escorting people, they do need to have their cameras on. But just for training purposes, that we do train people that, hey, to protect that person's sort of privacy, and just sort of angle your body away, so that when we're in the laboratory with someone who is in custody, that we're respecting their privacy while still maintaining that accountability for the officer of having the camera on. Is that a fair compromise?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think we write the policy for the majority of officers. I think we write the policy and try to cover every nuance for that few who would maybe want to make a joke or make you find something funny, or those are the ones that always end up in court doing something that's egregious and just did not make logical sense.
Yeah, and that's why
But they
we
do
have
it
the-
anyway, and they've done it. So we got to have it established. No, we don't want you to do this kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't
the
want to
camera's
assume
on,
anything.
So it will capture anything that happens during that.
Yes, I think I like that angle your body way to give a person privacy while doing the bodily function, relieving themselves or whatever.
Mhm.
You understand what I'm saying? I don't want to assume that every cop is rotten or every cop is good.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
I did make that note to reiterate during training to ensure that officers are giving respect to the subjects that we do have in custody.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. So we're still on. Did anyone have anything for section B11, the recording statements?
I see Pastor Jackie's hand up.
Ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. I apologize
evening.
for joining late. I have a quick question, just clarity around the section that you just covered, not about recording statements, but if you scroll back up
Yes,
to the
ma'am.
section that Deacon Lyles was just referencing. So it says the members on a guard assignment at a police medical, that whole statement. Is that in any way inconsistent with the wear use policy that's found earlier in the document that says that it has to be activated if you are in any uniform field assignment? So is a guard assignment a field assignment?
So ma'am, earlier we discussed that we do have to speak with our city attorney, Bridget Martin, who's going to discuss the proper procedures at a hospital guard assignment with their attorney to ensure that we're respecting everyone's privacy inside the police facility, and I'm sorry, the hospital facility. And once we get that answer, we're actually going to clarify that in this policy.
Okay, so that's speaking specifically to hospital. It says, what I'm reading says police, medical, psychiatric, jail, detention facility. So is all of that referencing that, or are those separate?
So we're for that particular one, the medical and psychiatric field is going to be more of like a hospital guard. And then usually when they're inside the police facility, they're going to be on camera inside of a room. And if they're not, our camera will be on.
Okay. I'll follow up because I just want to make sure there's no perceived inconsistency of what's been stated clearly earlier. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So maybe I could ask some questions to see if we can get at this. If you're on a guard assignment at any one of these, police, medical, psychiatric, jail, or detention facility, are you in uniform?
Yes, on a guard assignment. Yes, there's going to be a uniformed officer there.
Okay. So our B1 has wear requirements, so anyone with wearing a uniform has to wear a body worn camera, right? And so those officers who are on guard assignments would be wearing the body worn camera. That section, section B, whatever the section is, that talks about the guard assignment, that just sort of says you have the body worn camera worn, it's on you. You just don't necessarily have to activate it when you're
So
in
the
that
issue
assignment.
of activation,
Right.
okay. And that is what we're saying is discretionary.
Yes.
The hospital piece I get, the other piece is discretionary. Okay.
Was there anything else, ma'am? Your hand's still up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't lower it. No, thank you.
No problem.
So for B11,
Court statements.
I think I know why we have the second sentence there about not recording child abuse or sexual assault victims. But could the department say why they have it in there?
By policy, we're not supposed to have our body worn cameras, the video of the victim when we take those statements of a sexual assault victim.
That's
Yeah.
in a separate policy?
Yes.
So I believe this is also in furtherance of the statutory allowance for privacy for these specific victims.
Right, okay. Can we reference that other policy here?
Yeah, we'll follow up their hostage responses with SVS to get the exact sections there.
Because I remember looking at this section and reading some guidance, but it was in a different state about best practices for recording statements from child abuse or sexual assault victims and generally wanting to have the cameras on, but maybe we're at different policies for this state.
Yeah, so I believe this is around statutory privacy allowances for victims. So we'll follow up to make sure we have the proper reference there.
And do they have to assert that right, or is it defaulted? I can't remember, because they have like a ask them, or do they want to be private or confidential as opposed to it just defaulting?
Yeah, that one's probably, unless Officer Spontes, you know that off the top of your head, that one's, I want to make sure before I answer that we ask special victims, because yeah, I don't deal with those too often, thankfully.
For sure.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant Turner, did you say that as a practice, officers do ask ahead of time, or do they assume that all special victims shouldn't be recorded?
It's my at least my understanding that we go as if the victim is going to request that that privacy. So that's why there's this explicit prohibition. So this is not a new prohibition. This is in our current policy. Our current policy specifically states that we shall not request or we shall not use our body-worn cameras to take statements from sexual assault or child abuse or child sexual assault victims. So I want to speak with our special victims unit to confirm sort of why that is, why that current practice is. But I believe my practice is yes, that I generally do presume that privacy request unless it's otherwise, just because, you know, if we start out presuming that they don't, or sort of neutral with the camera on, and then they ask for that at least in the middle, then it can cause issues. So but we will definitely follow up to make sure that we're stating the correct law and what exactly the law says around that with our special victims unit, who are the subject matter experts on this.
Thank you.
Next section.
All right. So body worn camera use for documentation purposes. Pretty much we can activate the camera except for test or accidental false signals. Documentation shall be made in at least one of the following reports as appropriate: crime report, consolidated arrest report or juvenile record, field interview, the computer aided dispatch, notes or use of force report. So that's pretty much when an officer will annotate or say that our body worn camera was activated. And we can document it in any of these circumstances. Any questions for this section?
Yeah, back to the computer aided dispatching.
Yes, sir.
Is that a term that only would be esoteric just to law enforcement? Would the average person understand CAD or computer aided dispatching and how it applies to this? Because it's a record keeping, right? For the activity, the moment to moment TikTok activity of the police operation. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
So
this is Deputy Director Settle. I will say this: CAD is not exclusive to law enforcement. There are other places that use CAD in the private,
like fire department
sector.
or
Well, no, even in the private and public sector. However, there probably are a lot of community members who may not be aware of what CAD is, but it is not specific to law enforcement.
see what I'm driving at is these little subtleties that is just inside information to law enforcement. We ought to work hard at making it clear. I assume the police officers understand it, but for the average resident, so they can see that they're trying to communicate with us, that we really understand. I think we gain favor by doing that. So computer aided dispatching really doesn't define CAD to me, but we can put a couple of words with that and put it higher up in the document so folks where it first appears, and then people can understand, oh, they're trying to keep a record. This is where they keep a detailed record to time and date of when this incident went down or when this recording was made.
And to your point, I did Google it before this meeting because I did not know what it was.
I see, that's right. I rest
But
my
I
case,
also
Doc.
noted that in some of the other policies that were given as model policies, they did have in some section in the policy a definition of terms. So there were several terms and statements that were kind of given, grouped together, had an asterisk, and they just kind of had brief explanations so that if you came across a definition, a word, a reference that you were not aware of, you could go to that sheet and say, oh, that's what that means. So that's something that could be considered as well. If you don't want to note it every specific use, then maybe just designate a page, because there are a number of phrases and terms that might be foreign to the public that could help build trust.
Yes, it's, not to belabor it, but it's an easy thing to do and it doesn't cost a lot.
Understood. So I added a note to work on that. Mr. Lyles and Pastor Thompson. Is it Pastor Thompson? I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes, that's fine.
All right. Let's see here. So we will definitely take that into consideration. Also for the documentation, officers are expected to document whether they had delayed or non-activations of their body worn camera. And then when the activation was required by the policy shall be documented in the appropriate report and reported to the member supervisors. So that, again, there's another accountability measure there for our body worn documentation. Any comments with this section? as I move on to our data uploading. So pretty much at the end of every shift, and if needed during their shift to ensure storage capacity is not exceeded, we shall upload our cameras. All right. So far, so good. So officers are expected to annotate and categorize their body-worn camera files. So all members shall annotate the files daily, or if not feasible, by the end of the member's next regular scheduled workday. So we're expected to put the associated report number or incident number in the ID field, appropriate category, and there's going to be Appendix A, and we'll have that attached for our department categories that we'll have with the file retention schedule. So you'll be able to reference what category we picked and how long the camera or how long that file will be retained. So if none of those are applicable, we're just going to annotate it NA and leave the ID field blank. Members are authorized to view their video in order to identify the file for annotation, so we can look at it. Those of you who went to the class, we were able to pull it up on our phones so we can review it and annotate it appropriately. So, and then the last one here, it says the incidents require exceptional resources, a large-scale activation by the department members. The incident commander may approve the delay of annotations and the files, except in case requiring an investigative call out, and the incident commander shall document any such orders in the appropriate after action report. Any questions for the annotation and categorization of the body-worn camera files? All right. Let's see, shaking your head, no. Mr. Lyles?
Yes, they may be a little off the subject, but help me out. How long does, by law, do you have to keep these documents? You know, let's say an incident that occurred in the city of Oakland and the CAD is recovering this. How long must that be kept and discoverable?
Yeah, so the city has a retention schedule, and it depends on the incident.
Yeah.
But like for the body-worn camera files, it's at least the city is saying 2 years at minimum. For CAD, I think maybe Director Suttle, you might have a better idea, but it's somewhere around the 2 to 5 years, I think. But yeah, we adhere to the city's overall document retention schedule.
That probably should be referenced in here also, so folks would know that something that happened 6 months ago, 8 months, a year ago is still discoverable to them.
Right. So that Appendix A that will have the exact for the body-worn cameras.
Thank you.
Retention schedule and how long each one of these will be kept.
Very good.
Yeah.
Rita?
Yeah, could there be some kind of language about officers labeling the files with something if there aren't RD or incident numbers available? Like, I know that could pose a lot more work, but like maybe the location or the contact. With VIEVU, there was like a notes section, and that was really helpful just to get a sense of what that video is. But there's less with Axon, you know?
Yeah. So we went kind of back and forth on this on the when we started, and we put the Axon program in place. So the way that it's set up now, and as you kind of saw when we demonstrated it, the main way that officers are using this annotation is on the phones. We have a field control so that it only accepts the incident number as the full incident number, or the RD number, the report number, as a full report number, and it requires a certain number of letters and numbers for each case, specifically because we didn't want typos and things like that to cause problems when they were entering it. So, but the downside of that was with that field control, then you can't freeform and put stuff in there. So we kind of went back and forth. We liked the idea of people being able to freeform, but then there was just too much of a risk of fat fingers and putting the wrong number and getting it screwed up more. So that's kind of why we went to chose with the field control. So we are seeing a lot of, especially when we're talking about investigations like force investigations or complaints, that the supervisors, when they're using evidence.com on their computer, are then using the notes and to add more stuff in there. But yeah, we've actually put in a feature request with Axon to allow us to change those titles of the videos so that they could reflect like the officer's name and their serial number, as opposed to that weird serial number of a camera. But Axon's like, yeah, we put it in the feature request queue. We'll get to it when we get to it, which is a polite way for them to tell us now.
But I think the title field can be edited anyway, though, not like the ID, right?
Yeah, so the title field can be edited anyway. We specifically have the officers keep it as it's generated, because that way it keeps the date and time. And that's the thing we really want in there, is because when we're downloading these things, it's fine when you're viewing it in the native application, but when we're downloading it, keeping the date and time is pretty good. So we have told the officers to keep that title field as is, so that we at least have that portion in there.
Do you have the website up so that you can show us what you're talking about? Or easy access to it?
I can bring it up.
Thank you. So, okay. Still up there, Axon Body 3 video has a date, time, and then what's that code at the end there?
Yeah, that's the serial number of the camera that
Got it.
recorded it. Yeah.
Okay. And that's automatically generated whenever the video is created.
Yes.
It's the ID and the categories that you want to leave as NA or okay. And is there anything that we can think of that might assist for those situations that don't have a report number or anything else?
There's a description field. That could be like the notes, the comments section.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we have not mandated, so again, the policy is the minimum and the mandate. One of the reasons why we didn't mandate a change in the description is because that requires someone to go to a terminal, like within the police department, a computer here. That is something that we had with the VView, and that was it took the officers away from time in the field. One of the big selling points of the Axon system is the ability to use that phone to categorize and provide the ID number mobile with the phone. And so if we mandated that they'd had to create a description, we've kind of lost a lot of that usefulness and being mobile that we've gained from the technology by forcing the officers to come back to either the report writing room or something like that to enter in the description, because that's something they have to access on evidence.com. We can't access evidence.com on the mobile data terminals, and the mobile computers are in the cars because of the bandwidth.
Rita, what are we thinking of when you asked about putting a note in or having a location or something. How does that help? What's going on?
Yeah, so I often, not often, but it depends if we're reviewing everything at CPRA now, not just force and like discrimination. And sometimes it can be difficult to identify like a subject contact because those don't always have incident or report numbers. So it'd be just going off the title. So it'd be helpful to have some kind of note as to the location of where that recording took place, or who is on the video, you know, the name of the subject being spoken to, or what the video is about, just to make it faster to identify the video without having to go through and see if we find the person we're looking for. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah,
I see go ahead.
I think this is particularly problematic when we don't have a sergeant interview the complainant in the field, when rather the interview is done by internal affairs, because if a sergeant interviews someone in the field, we have, you know, that sergeant's name and date and time, so we can, makes it easier to find that video, and that might lead us to others. I'm just wondering, thinking out loud, if a complainant makes a complaint to internal affairs, could the internal affairs intake technician or investigator then go into evidence.com, try and locate the video and tag it with the complaint number, which would make it easier for CPRA to locate it, since they will, you know, have it first if the complaint goes to them. I don't know if that's feasible or not.
Right. Yeah, that does sound so like something, you know, these are administrative tasks that we're kind of talking about here, is after the fact. We are cognizant, at least, you know, this from the front end, is that these are, you know, these are requirements for our frontline personnel, the ones who were requesting to go and answer calls for service. So, you know, adding administrative burdens to make it easier at the back end to find something is not something that's really palatable. However, I do think that, yeah, that kind of ask is something that's doable. I can't promise, you know, myself, Director Suttler, or Officer Cervantes, we can't say anything about changing IAD's practices, but I think that's something that maybe if we could bring through Director Zisser to bring to Acting Captain Caney when they are doing intake, because I know that would really help our supervisors who are doing division level investigations as well. If the intake personnel would tag the videos so that we can find them pretty easy, because the same problems you all are having, the sergeants are having when they have to do these division level investigations.
Sounds like you have some support internally. I'm sure you'll figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
I see a small little field on the right side that talks about no location added. Yeah, that's right there. Is that feature on the phones or the phone interface?
No, that is a built-in feature, if enabled, for GPS, that would add it automatically from the cameras. As right now, we do not have that, so it does not add geotagging metadata to the videos.
That was my last attempt at trying to get that. All right. Any other questions about this, what we see on the screen, anybody?
All right. I'll go ahead and go back to the video. Any further questions about B14, the annotation and categorization of the body worn camera files?
Or the,
Well, I notice and appreciate that the language is shall, and I'm wondering if we're going to be coming up on language about discipline, if that shall is not heeded.
There is supervisory review at the bottom of this policy, I believe. I don't know if it directly addresses that, but when we get there, we can bring that back up for you, if you don't mind. All right, so B15 is just our discretionary activation and deactivation. Members may use their own discretion when deciding to activate or deactivate their camera when not required to activate or prohibited from activation as described above. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to suggest if B15 could perhaps be better situated earlier in the document, perhaps right after B11, right around B12, where you've already had an extensive discussion
Okay.
around activation and deactivation. Then that way, all of that information or references remains grouped together.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. That is, we'll work on that. On the formatting of this. Any other comments about the discretionary activation or and deactivation? All right, so we'll go on to section C, viewing of the body worn camera files. So members' review of their own body worn camera files. It is authorized to properly identify data files, refresh the memory regarding the incident or any other work-related purposes unless otherwise prohibited by this policy. So personnel viewing any video also shall document the reason for access in the notes field of each video file viewed. So that notes field you guys kind of got to see in evidence.com, that bottom part that Frida was pointing out earlier. So, sorry, any questions so far about reviewing of our files? All righty.
Does this part of the policy mean that members may review the video recording, say, prior to writing a report?
If they're reviewing a statement, depends on the incident, Commissioner.
So let's break that down. Let's say it's a detention. Are they allowed to review their body worn camera before drafting that report? I see Lieutenant Turner nodding his head.
Yes.
And then statements by any person, whether it's suspect, victim, witness.
Yes, our cameras, yes.
And then just sort of in the field investigation, if they have it on, I went to go look at this, I saw this in this particular location. This is the timing, et cetera. Okay. Is there any timing restrictions on when they can watch it?
That I'm not
No, not that so there are several restrictions, and we'll see about if there are, other things that come up. So if they are notified of being under investigation for a complaint or for a criminal matter, if there was a use of force, a significant use of force, things like that. But otherwise, no, because the policy is not only for like reviewing reports or whatever, but we do also, especially like courtroom testimony or something like that, especially if the incident is a few months or maybe even years old. It is common practice that the officers will review their report, body worn camera, et cetera, before going for testimony to refresh their memory, for instance.
Is this a place where we should have the word shall? That's a question.
I would probably
And I know we authorize them, but should we do more than authorize? Maybe strongly encourage? I don't know.
I mean, it kind of depends on the circumstance. I was just out in the field on Sunday, went to make a stop and then later wrote a report about it. Didn't feel it was necessary. It was sort of contemporaneous. On the other hand, where it's, a complicated scene or there are a lot of statements or, as often happens, you sort of go to one call, deal with the thing, then several other things happen. And then later in the night, you're writing a report. It's definitely a good idea. This is one where, though, I don't think we necessarily want to say that you shall review it, because there are a lot of times where it's just like, oh yeah, that was a relatively quick one, or remember, let me just write out the report real quick. I do think it's worth, emphasizing that in the training, that it is a good practice. And that is, that's something I train when I train in the academy, is that I teach the officers to treat the body worn camera like they treat other pieces of evidence, you know, that they come across, that they're going to review and look at and maybe re-examine as they're writing the reports. And it depends on the importance of that piece of evidence to their overall, the overall incident as to how much they're going to look at it or review it or reference it as they write their police report.
So when I think about this review, I think about what I think you told us pretty early on, Lieutenant Turner, which was that these body worn cameras, they capture so much. They capture so much, and oftentimes even capture things that the officers themselves had no idea about, right? It have a wide view, doesn't account for focus or stress or attention. And so when I think about situations that I have had in the past where a police report is written from an officer's member's memory, right? And it really accurately reflects what they were thinking about in the course of something that may be very important, a serious investigation, motion to suppress that involves whether or not there was a legal seizure or not, and what exactly the officer was thinking. It strikes me as a more honest sort of representation of what they saw and they were thinking if they write the report before they see the body worn camera, because the body worn camera gives them more than what they may have actually been aware of. And I can understand why it's this way for some of the more serious things, the criminal investigations, the level 1 investigations, the administrative investigations. But I also kind of think that they should have a first crack at writing a police report before they're able to see the body worn camera. That's a policy decision, obviously, but you know, that's sort of where I come from on that particular issue.
Yeah, understood. That is a just definitely a you know, a valid position. You know, I'd probably want to ask you know, the chief or others executives around their positions. I think my position is that it is really especially with the level of scrutiny, you know, we ask the officers to make these you know, their police reports as accurate as possible, but yes, when they're talking about decisions, it is about the decisions they made and the evidence, information they had at the time they were making the decision. So that is an important part, and actually it's part of the curriculum or my lesson plan for use of force. For instance, when I teach use of force, is that regardless of what evidence they discover later, that is not relevant to their decision making at the time of the use of force. It is what they knew at the time when they made their decision. It's always going to be a tough one, because I do agree that there's the possibility that suddenly, you know, as they're reviewing, they see something that they didn't see before that allows for a change one way or the other. It's a sticky wicket, and you know, I'm not necessarily sure which way to go, but I do know that you know, as a piece of evidence and for most of our general investigations, that this is the way, you know, barring other than these very important administrative tool or investigations, that this is the way the department has been for some time.
Yeah, and I get it. You know, especially I'm glad to see that they are prohibited when reviewing body worn cameras in these administrative investigations or criminal investigations, because you know, many, especially in officer involved shootings, where you see a hand go is very important, and what you see versus what is captured on a body worn camera may be completely separate, right? I think it has a lot of implications for use of force, not just in sort of Fourth Amendment or report writing, but also in use of force. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me add just one quick thing. I would hope that these body worn cameras get officers to get it right. I don't care if they got it absolutely right on the street or later on. That's okay if you get it right later on. I thought this happened, but 2 hours later, after I looked at the camera, I can see I was in error. Okay, so we 849B people, we can back up. I say, I'm sorry, we were wrong. What we tend to have in America, and this is the truth, you guys got to admit it, you know, this is what it is, and we're going to go down with it. And then what happens? They get in court, and then these great attorneys show the camera that is diametrically different from what they said it was. And that doesn't help anyone, doesn't help the community, the officers under scrutiny. Did he lie? Did she lie? How much money is this going to cost the total community from the general fund? Let's try to get it right first. I wish they would, before they write the report, they look at it and make sure they get it right and stop all of this falsifying and again, we're not talking about 75% of the police officers, but there's a hardcore 10 or 15% all throughout the nation that will write something that is totally different than what happened. And we need to stop that.
So Commissioner, I think that's, that'd probably be pretty similar to what you're going to hear from the chief. So that's probably the answer as to why I want these people to review and
I don't want to catch them doing wrong and then we have to pay out of the general fund. I want to catch them doing something right. And if you did something wrong, then take your 2 or 3 days out on the beach for doing something wrong, as opposed to, killing everybody's reputation. We're defending the wrong people.
So I might add, in terms of this particular policy, that I do see there's personnel viewing any video file shall document the reason for access. Perhaps we should have it in other places as well, the documentation, kind of like how we did above. Incident report, use of force report, or although unlikely to be use of force report, but arrest report.
So I would say that I prefer to keep it in the notes because it's right there. It's contemporaneous with the with viewing it on the evidence.com. And I think that the actual backup is the audit of the audit function of this. So every time, so for instance, when we saw Officer Cervantes even open up that file to show us there, that logged into that file's audit. So we will be able to see that at this date and time from this IP address, she accessed that file. So I do want to probably just keep it there to avoid missing it, say, having a duplicate requirement and then people miss it and then are out of compliance for for missing an admin requirement.
I forgot about the audit trail. Thanks.
Any further comments about the member review of their own body worn camera files before we move on to when members are prohibited from reviewing their body worn camera files, which we kind of already talked about. All right, so we're prohibited from reviewing our body worn camera files when the member is designated as involved in a level 1 investigation. The members who are involved in a level 1 investigation are prohibited from reviewing their files until the level 1 investigator allows the review pursuant to section D7. The criminal investigation of a member, so personnel who are the subject of a criminal investigation may not view any audio or video recordings related to the incident upon approval as specified below by the CID or Internal Affairs Division Commander. Any administrative investigation of a member, so personnel having received notification or complaint notification report from IAD and who are considered to be a subject or witness officer, they may not view any audio video recording related to that incident except upon approval as specified below by the IAD commanders.
Is there a notification for CPRA investigations?
So maybe Frida or Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if the CPRA opens a case that you would alert the IAD, and then so that they would receive that complaint notification report from IAD. Is that correct?
That's correct. If we receive a complaint within 24 hours, we send it over to IAD. So they're
Okay.
They issue the case number.
Right.
All right, so Section C3, the supervisor and command viewing of subordinate body worn camera files. So supervisors and commanders, they are authorized to review their own body worn camera files, all video files of their subordinates and necessary to complete required duties, any associated video files of non-subordinate members unless otherwise prohibited by this policy. So pretty much the supervisor command can view our subordinates files. All right, C4 is review of body worn camera files by criminal investigation personnel, personnel assigned to CID or other investigatory units. They're allowed to view the body worn cameras associated to their active or ongoing investigation. The investigators conducting the criminal investigations, they shall file to determine whether the body worn camera is evidentiary value and add categories to it as necessary to modify the retention or access of restrictions to certain files. And they'll notify the system administrator to remove any access restriction when the criminal investigation is closed. So this is for our CID personnel. All right, no questions here.
I do have a question. Is there anything regarding an officer reviewing another officer's body worn camera footage, another officer who was at the scene, other than a supervisor?
So officers are only, we're in the, specifically for the field, we review our own. Unless the only other circumstance I could think of is if I accidentally grab someone else's camera, technically it's their camera, but I could have that reassigned to me.
Yeah, but the way we've provisioned or we've set up the system, the officers, unlike the supervisors and commanders who can see multiple other people, officers can only see on the system their own files. So yeah, they cannot access those.
So could, let's say, two officers working together, could one officer show the other their body worn camera footage through their phone? In other words, is there any way for a witness officer to view another officer's body worn camera footage?
Yeah, so there is a way technically, yeah, through the phone, you know, and to see that. That is, that's something that, you know, for instance, we allow review, and I think it says in there that specifically that officers are allowed to review their own video. And so in terms of our investigators, they do view others from the entire scene. But yeah, when it talks about the review of video, I think the only allowance is for officers to review their own.
Right, but in terms of these rules, is there anything prohibiting an officer, field officer, from watching another officer's body worn camera footage? Let's say prior to writing a report.
Right, let's see, actually, Felicia, could you go back to C1, please, and just see the language there? Yeah, so, I mean, it is, yeah, it is not necessarily the clearest right there, but when they say authorized they're authorized to review their own body worn cameras, it is specifically for theirs and not other officers.
So does this prevent the situation where officer says, hey, I'm watching my own body worn camera. Anybody else who wants to watch, whatever you're gonna do? Like, what is the policy you want to get at here? That they review their own body worn cameras? They review any body worn cameras? Should it be a specific prohibition unless otherwise authorized? Like,
Yeah, I mean, the department's, I think, desire is for them to only watch their own. You know, that the supervisor will watch multiple ones, but that is, you know, in terms of misconduct or anything like that, right? There, so we have other, and we do have, you know, it's always tough because we have these other policies, right? Like the use of force policy, which prohibits specifically officers from coordinating to write reports about uses of force. So that would, if like, let's say Felicia and I were together and got into a level 2 use of force, and then I was like, hey, you know, I just happened to be watching the camera and you just happened to be right there, right? That would be maybe I could argue that I didn't violate this policy, but I definitely violated the use of force reporting policy. Right. So there's like so many layers of these things. If that's something that you know, there's a desire to spell out more specifically, I think we can, to just say that you know, members are not authorized to view others' video. But yeah, it's kind of a thing that hasn't cropped up. And that's probably why this language has been sufficient for a while.
I just think it's impossible to control. You know, officers are going to talk, and they're going to talk on duty and off duty, and there's no way we can get around that. I have a question also. These phones we keep talking about, who owns these phones? The
department owns this. There's a separate policy. It's almost done that they're about these department phones and what they can and cannot do. It's I-19 DGO.
So these cell phones are owned by the city of Oakland.
That's right.
All right, great.
Oh, yeah.
And then last point, I'm more concerned about officers sharing information with other citizens unauthorized. I know there's a felony against that, a federal crime against doing that. Do we have that reflected in the policy? In other words, can somebody call me up and say, hey man, my son was involved in this and that. Can you talk to your boy who arrested him and find out what's on the camera? And then the officer says, yeah, I'll get back to you. And he does.
Okay. Yeah, I think, yeah, and Officer Cervantes, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's definitely specific explicit prohibitions about sharing, you know, these cameras or these files.
DMV files. All
right.
kind of,
yeah, that was a big
yeah.
part of the Privacy Advisory Committee.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's a little further down, I think maybe even in section E about, you know, about what we can, you know, copying and sharing, things like that, posting on social media. In terms of, you know, that kind of thing, yeah, there beyond that, again, another layer, right, is like you said, that's a criminal violation, and then also a violation of the general manual of rules around like impeding investigations or assisting criminals, right, which those are termination offenses.
And I'm thinking of that Kobe Bryant helicopter incident.
Oh,
Yeah.
And you know, that kind of situation, salacious money-making opportunity comes up. So
yeah. So yeah, we'll have the opportunity to talk about that, and when we talk about these the sharing stuff. But yeah, this is something that's near and dear to the Privacy Advisory Committee's heart. So yeah, we are very cognizant of that as well. Need to know and right to know only.
Director Subtle.
I was just going to add, but Lieutenant Turner briefly addressed it. That would be one of our manual of rules violations that has a very stiff discipline if that were to occur.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I did want to just note for our timekeeping purposes, I apologize, but yeah, we are kind of close to time. So we'll just make sure, Officer Cervantes, we can just make sure we bookmark where we leave when we're done.
I just wanted to say, I'm curious what other rules other departments have regarding an officer viewing another officer's body worn camera footage. In other words, what is the established or best practice on that? And that's certainly something that could be researched.
Yeah, you know, I'll be honest, I don't know too much about the other policies. So they are available on the Commission's ad hoc website. So I'll take a look. But when we did put this system in place in February, we were provisioning it with Axon. One of the things that they actually told us was that they were seeing a best practice, or not best practice, they were seeing a lot of agencies where the agencies were allowing officers to view each other's body worn cameras because of, you know, it's a piece of evidence, writing report type of thing. We disagreed and decided not to go that way. You know, as you can see, there's pluses and minuses. Like Chief Lyles said, you know, we want to get it right, review the video. On the other hand, there's some serious accountability and, you know, factual concerns. Did you actually see this, or did you now remember it because you saw someone else's body worn camera, which caught a different perspective, right? So we kind of decided that we were going to take this middle ground that also coincidentally we already have, which is that people can view their own.
Let's see, where were we? Right, we were right here. How much more does this section, C section have? Why don't we finish up the C section and then call it a night?
All right, so the use of the body worn camera files for training. So training staff is authorized to view body worn camera files regarding incidents which may serve as a learning or teaching tool. A body worn camera file may be utilized as a training tool for individual specific units, department as a whole. A recommendation to utilize the body worn camera file, such purpose may come from any source. A person recommending the utilizing of the body worn camera file for training purposes shall submit the recommendation through their proper chain of command to the training section commander. The training section commander shall review the recommendation and determine how to best utilize the body worn camera file, considering the identity of the persons involved, sensitivity of the incident, and the benefit of utilizing the file versus other means. Any comments about C5? If not, I can mark off. We will start and pick up back at section D. And Frida, please keep your comment for later. I didn't forget. All right.
Let me just check. Thank you so much. Let me just check one thing on when exactly the next date is supposed to be. Oh, day after Labor Day. Well, I don't have other commissioners to weigh in on this. How do we all feel about coming back on September 6th?
I feel great, so let's do it.
Would be fine with me, and it would also be my last meeting because I'm leaving CPRA as of September 9th.
Sorry to hear that, but we will celebrate it with you. Celebration? I can't tell.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah. For sure. September 6th then. I will let Commissioners Harbin Forte and Vice Chair Peterson know. Thank you all so much. This was, I'll say fun, but I don't know that everyone else thinks it's fun. Again, thank you all. See you on the 6th. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Stop recording.